The morning sunlight filtered through the gaps in the curtain, casting a soft golden glow over the room. Slowly, Anne's eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the gentle brightness. Beside her, Samuel remained soundly asleep, his breathing deep and steady. She watched him for a few moments, tracing the familiar contours of his face, remembering a time when mornings began with his tender kisses, his warmth a silent promise of love. Now, the dawns were quieter, the routine predictable, and the gestures of affection had faded into distant memories. Slipping silently out of bed, and padded across the room and into the bathroom. As she stood before the mirror, she caught sight of the faint lines forming at the corners of her eyes, a subtle reminder of the years that had passed. A quiet sigh escaped her lips as she ran a hand through her hair, reflecting on how swiftly time had slipped through her fingers. 12 years had gone by since she and Samuel had exchanged vows, their hearts brimming with dreams of the future. But dreams had a way of changing, of fading, sometimes without notice. Downstairs, the comforting hum of the coffee maker filled the air as Anne prepared breakfast. The familiar rhythm of morning rituals brought a fleeting sense of peace, and just as she finished setting the table, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the staircase. "Good morning, Mom." Mariana, 10, and Luke, 8, burst into the kitchen, their voices bright with excitement. A smile lifted the corners of Anne's lips. "Good morning, my loves," she said warmly, pouring milk into their glasses. "Did you sleep well, Mariana? And you, Luke?" The children launched into animated stories about their dreams, their little voices filling the kitchen with laughter, and listened intently, asking questions, delighting in the whimsical tales they spun. These moments with them were precious, small pockets of warmth that anchored her, reminding her that love still thrived in the simplest exchanges. A few minutes later, Samuel entered the kitchen, already dressed for work. "Good morning, family," he said, his voice even, detached, and placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of him, an old habit that once held unspoken intimacy. "Thanks," he murmured, barely glancing up from his phone. A pang of sadness rippled through her chest. He used to thank her with a kiss, a soft, lingering one that spoke of love without words. Now, the gestures had become mechanical, devoid of tenderness. She swallowed the ache and focused on the morning bustle, watching as Samuel sipped his coffee, scrolling through the news, while the children chatted about school. She felt like an observer in her own home, as if she existed on the periphery of a life she had once been at the center of. After breakfast, Samuel kissed the children on their foreheads before heading to work, barely acknowledging Anne. She stood by the sink, washing dishes as a distant hum of his car faded down the street. Once the children were dropped off at school, she returned to the empty house, the silence pressing against her like an unseen weight. As she vacuumed the living room, her thoughts drifted. When had things changed so drastically? She remembered the way Samuel used to look at her, his gaze filled with admiration, how he would pull her into his arms after a long day, their conversation stretching late into the night, weaving dreams for the future. Now, their exchanges were reduced to discussions about bills, school schedules, and household chores. The warmth that once existed between them had dimmed, replaced by routine and quiet resignation. Later, as she folded the freshly laundered clothes, her eyes landed on a framed wedding photo on the dresser. Their smiles in the picture were radiant, their hands entwined, their eyes brimming with love and promise. She traced a finger over the glass, a lump forming in her throat. Had Samuel stopped seeing her as a woman he fell in love with? Had she become only the mother of his children, the keeper of their home, the quiet figure who ensured life ran smoothly? The days slipped by in a blur of chores and errands, and by the time dinner arrived, the atmosphere in the house felt thick with unspoken words. Samuel barely spoke, his replies short, his attention elsewhere. The children, sensing the weight in the air, were quieter than usual. Later, as Anne washed the dishes, she felt tears well up, but she quickly blinked them away. She wouldn't let the children see her sadness. She glanced toward the living room, where Samuel sat on the sofa, absorbed in his tablet, oblivious to her turmoil. The space between them felt vast, an unbridgeable distance that stretched further with each passing day. On Friday night, once the children were asleep, Anne stepped onto the porch, gazing at the endless expanse of stars above. She remembered how she and Samuel used to do this together, whispering stories about constellations, dreaming about their future. Now, She sat alone, the chill of the night wrapping around her, the silence more deafening than the absence of words. When Saturday morning arrived, the sun shone brightly. Button woke with a heavy heart. The children, full of weekend excitement, dashed outside play. Samuel, as always on Saturdays, retreated to the garage, tending to his motorcycle with a quiet dedication he once reserved for their love, and remained in the kitchen, cleaning up after breakfast, but an overwhelming sense of suffocation gripped her. The walls of the house felt smaller, pressing in on her, as if she were being swallowed by the monotony of her life. Without a second thought, she grabbed her car keys and slipped out the door, needing air, needing space, needing something she couldn't quite name. She drove aimlessly, letting the road guide her until she reached a familiar place, a quiet lake just outside the city. It was here, years ago, that Samuel had taken her on their first date. It was here, beneath a sky full of stars, that he had asked her to marry him. Stepping out of the car, she walked to the water's edge, settling onto a large rock. The lake stretched before her, its surface shimmering under the midday sun. Memories washed over her, romantic picnics, stolen kisses, the reckless joy of diving into the cool water on summer days, the way they used to talk for hours about everything and nothing. She closed her eyes, inhaling the crisp air, and wondered, when had they lost this? When had the love that once defined them faded into something so distant, so unfamiliar? A single tear slipped down her cheek as she whispered into the breeze, "Where did we go?" and sat by the lake for what felt like hours, caught in the delicate web of nostalgia and introspection. The gentle lapping of the water against the shore mirrored the quiet turmoil within her. She thought about her life, the beautiful children she and Samuel had brought into the world, the stability they had built together, the countless small victories of everyday life. And yet, beneath the surface of comfort and routine, there was an ache she could no longer ignore. The silence between her and Samuel had grown louder with each passing day, an invisible barrier that neither of them spoke of but both felt deeply. She feared that their love, one so unique and special, had become buried beneath the weight of responsibility, lost somewhere between school pickups, mortgage payments, and unspoken disappointments. As the sun began its slow descent beyond the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose, and finally stood, brushing off a small pebble from her palms. It was time to go home. The drive back was quiet, her thoughts a swirling mix of sorrow for what they had become, longing for what they once had, and, deep beneath it all, a fragile flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to reignite what had faded. Maybe love, though weathered, could still be found if they both reached for it. When she stepped through the front door, she found Samuel sitting with the children in the living room. His eyes lifted to haze, a brief flash of concern flickering across his face. But he said nothing. Without a word, she walked to the kitchen, moving almost mechanically as she began preparing dinner. Her mind was still entangled in the emotions of the afternoon, reflecting on the memories she had unearthed and the quiet realization that had settled in her heart. Tonight's meal was simple. She lacked the energy or enthusiasm to create anything elaborate. Setting the table with little thought, she called the family to eat. The children rushed in, their laughter and chatter filling the space with life. Samuel, however, moved more slowly, his usual quiet presence even more pronounced. There was something in his demeanor, a thoughtfulness she hadn't seen in a long time. As the children animatedly recounted their day, Samuel asked them a few casual questions, but his mind seemed elsewhere, and sat in silence, lost in her own thoughts, debating whether she should attempt to bridge the ever-widening gap between them. The words hovered on the edge of her tongue, but fear kept them there, unspoken. And then, something unexpected happened. Samuel slowly placed his napkin down, wiped his mouth, and, without warning, turned to look at Anne. His gaze held something unfamiliar, a mixture of tenderness and quiet resolve. "You know," he began, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight, "everyone at work envies me." And blinked, caught off guard. Even the children paused, their attention shifting to their father, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Samuel continued, his expression unwavering. "But it's not because of my job. It's not because of my car or my motorcycle." He exhaled, his fingers idly tracing the edge of his plate. "They envy me because I have you waiting for me at home." Anne's heart fluttered unexpectedly, her breath catching in her throat. She opened her mouth to respond, but Samuel gently lifted a hand, signaling her to let him finish. When you're not here, the house feels lifeless. You are the heart of this family, and you're the anchor that keeps everything in place. The things you do, no matter how small it may seem, are the very things that bring me peace. It's what makes this place a home. His words hung in the air, thick with emotion, and felt a warmth spread through her chest, an ache so deep that she hadn't even realized how much she had needed to hear those words. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. Mariana, always perceptive, tilted her head. "Dad," she asked softly, "why are you saying this now?" Samuel smiled gently at his daughter before turning back to Anne. "Because sometimes we forget to say the things that matter most, even when they are right in front of us. And today, when you were gone, I realize how much I miss you, even when it's just for a few hours." Luke, ever the sensitive one, hesitated before asking in a small voice, "Are you and Mom going to separate?" And then Samuel shared a quiet laugh, the first true moment of lightness in what felt like an eternity. "No, my love," and reassured, reaching over to squeeze Luke's hand. "We're not going anywhere." That night, after the children were tucked into bed, and Samuel lingered in the hallway, their eyes meeting in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with quiet determination, Samuel stepped forward, wrapping her in a deep embrace, one filled with meaning, with unspoken apologies, with love that had never truly left. "I'm sorry," he murmured against her hair. "I'm sorry for being distant. Life, responsibilities, everything just started piling up, and I let it take over. But I need you to know I still love you. I think I love you even more than I did in the beginning." And let out a shaky breath, pressing her face against his shoulder. The relief was overwhelming, and the tears she had held back finally slipped free. "I'm sorry, too," she admitted softly. "I should have told you how I was feeling. I thought maybe you didn't notice me anymore, that you regretted marrying me." Samuel pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his gaze firm with conviction. "Never," he said without hesitation. "Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. And I promise, I'll make sure you know that every day." They stood there for what felt like forever, wrapped in each other's warmth, the steady rhythm of Samuel's heart grounding in a way she hadn't felt in years. That night, they lay in bed, speaking in hushed tones as they had once done in the early days of their love. They talked about their dreams, their fears, the ways they had drifted apart and the ways they could find their way back. They made plans, real plans, to set aside time for themselves, to go on dates, to hold on to the love that had always been there, hidden beneath the routine of life. When they finally drifted into sleep, the sky outside was beginning to lighten with the first hint of morning. But this time, and felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She understood now, love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. It lives in the quiet moments, in the small acts of care, in the unspoken gestures that say, "I see you, I cherish you, I choose you," again and again. And in the weeks that followed, the change was undeniable. Samuel began waking up earlier, joining the family for breakfast instead of rushing out the door. He started calling her during the day, just to check in, just to hear her voice. Dinner conversations grew livelier, filled with laughter and shared stories. Then, one quiet Friday night, after the children had gone to bed, Samuel surprised her with an impromptu picnic under the stars in their backyard. They lay side by side, gazing at the endless sky, reminiscing, laughing, dreaming anew, and realizing that love, like life, moves in waves. There are moments of passion, moments of quiet companionship, and moments of doubt. But what truly matters is choosing each other through it all. And as she lay there beside the man she had loved for so many years, she felt an unwavering certainty deep in her soul.